What if Arthas Menethil was not blinded by his passion to save his people or by his anger and vengeance directed to those responsible for distributing the plague upon the human kingdoms, and instead listened to his fellow allies and maintained a level head while confronting this threat? Welcome everyone to a what if video where we take one of the most pivotal moments of Warcraft history and change it to see what would happen if things occurred differently. Keep in mind, I don't work at Blizzard, so I can't tell you word for word 100% what would happen, but based on our knowledge of lore and the characters that play a part in the story's development, I will give you my best assumption on how things were to play out. In today's video, we will be asking the question, what if Arthas had never purged Stratholme? When an unknown plague befell the human kingdoms, Arthas Menethil along with Captain Falric and his men were dispatched to meet up with Jaina Proudmoore so that they could investigate a strange illness which befell their people. Eventually in time they discovered that the lands that they journeyed through were filled with undead where the common folk used to live. They then concluded that the mysterious plague which afflicted their people was designed to kill their hosts and was infected within the granary which was distributed from Ner'zhul. However, when they neared Hearthglen, the true design of the plague was made known to Arthas. The plague wasn't meant to kill, it was meant to turn those afflicted into undead themselves. And this was seen firsthand by the prince when most of the citizens of Hearthglen transformed into undead before Arthas' very eyes. In a matter of seconds, his loyal people fell to the ground and clutched their stomachs as blood rushed out of their mouths and life vanished from their eyes. But as Arthas and his men were surrounded and the battle that they engaged in seemed to be lost, Lord Uther and a fresh battalion of knights rushed into the village and dealt with the remaining undead. Instead of celebrating their victory though, Arthas immediately mounted his horse and made way to Stratholme, driven by an overwhelming desire to kill Mal'Ganis. Now this is where things are going to change. This is where we are going to alter events to see how things play out. Along the way to the city, Arthas meets up with the prophet Medivh, who tells the young prince that the only way that he may save his people is if he led them across the seas to Kalimdor. Arthas would then recognize the prophet's power, see that perhaps there may be some wisdom within the Guardian's words, but would say, "I'm sorry, I can't," and continue to make his way to Stratholme. When he arrived, he would see that the grain had already been distributed, but instead of thinking to purge the city, he would then consider the prophet's words. "The shadow has already fallen, and nothing you will do will deter it. If you truly wish to save your people, lead them across the sea, to the west, to Kalimdor." But before he would suggest the idea to Falric, Uther, or Jaina, Jaina would interrupt his thought process by stating that they should act with logic, not emotion. She would then follow up by saying that Antonidas had always taught her that if something was magic in origin, then magic can combat it. She would then suggest the idea that Arthas and Uther remain here to keep watch over the city, while she returned to Dalaran to inform her mentor of the plague to see if he knew of any incantations to combat it. Both would agree, but once Jaina was gone, Arthas would tell Uther, his former teacher, that it would not work. Uther would ask, "Why?" Arthas would reply, "I saw the people of Hearthglen transform in a matter of seconds." After one full day, Jaina would return after having established an emergency meeting in Dalaran, briefing Antonidas, Prince Kael'thas, and the rest of the Archmages of what was happening in the human kingdoms. Unfortunately, Jaina would return without any knowledge of how to cure the undead plague, but would not return empty-handed. A squadron of Kirintor Magi would accompany her in whatever horrors that they might encounter upon returning to Uther and Arthas. When she teleported back to her comrades, she would see waves of undead attacking Arthas, Uther, and their men, but to her surprise, the soldiers would show little fatigue and would suffer little to no casualties, whereas the undead corpses would litter the battlefield by the hundreds. The reason for this would be Arthas. Amidst the fighting, Jaina would see a powerful aura of light enveloping both Arthas and his hammer, Light's Vengeance. The Light, having seen a worthy student, a student that would not abandon the teachings of the light even in the most dire of circumstances, even when death surrounded his soldiers and consumed his people within the city of Stratholme. For his loyalty and faith, the light shone down upon him, empowering him with unmatched might and righteous fury. Together with the Paladin's men and the Magi, the soldiers of Lordaeron were able to hold their ground until Jaina would suggest a retreat. The 25,000 undead citizens of Stratholme poured out of the city, all intent on massacring the remaining defenders of the desecrated land. But amongst the hordes of undead rushing out of the kingdom, one figure stood, higher than the others. A figure that with whom the undead rallied to, and a figure with which Arthas instantly recognized despite never having seen before: Mal'Ganis. For a split second, Arthas would think of succumbing to his vengeance, of breaking the line and rushing forward to slay the Dreadlord, but a feeling of warmth would bring him back to a sense of reality. The light would protect him, but not if he were to run in one man against 1,000 undead and a Dreadlord with the sole intent of avenging his already fallen people. That day will come, but that day is not today. As if to reassure Arthas, Uther placed his hand upon Arthas' shoulders and shouted out, "Come lad, it's time to go." Nodding in agreement, Arthas along with Uther and the rest of their soldiers would be teleported to Lordaeron with the help of Jaina and the other Magi. Arthas departing without once looking back at the Dreadlord. At that moment, a piercing howl would echo all throughout Stratholme that shifted the undead ranks. But the howl of anger would not come from Mal'Ganis. It would come from the Frozen Throne. Once reappearing in Lordaeron, Arthas and his forces would discover that Jaina and the Magi had teleported them into the courtroom of Taranis. In the courtroom, dozens of knights clad in armor and who looked like they were ready to march off into battle spun around, first defensively, but after seeing that it was their own people who had entered the palace, would lower their arms. The group of soldiers would then split through the middle as both Antonidas and King Taranis walked eagerly to welcome the group. Taranis instantly hugging his own son, and Antonidas putting a hand on Jaina's shoulders while saying, "You've done well, girl." Arthas would then ask if the capital was under siege, noting all of the heavily armed knights, but his father would comfort him by saying that the capital was secure and that these men were only prepped for battle because they were about to be sent on a search party to find Arthas, since Antonidas had traveled to Lordaeron to inform Taranis of everything Jaina had told him earlier. Arthas, grateful that his father had responded so quickly in assembling a search party to rescue he, Uther, and their men, then broke the reunion by instantly saying that they would need to mobilize their people and lead them to Kalimdor. At this, the king's grin would fade, but not due to his faith in his son being shaken, but just curious as to what the prince had to say. Antonidas would then state that perhaps Arthas and his men were not in the right state of mind to offer these suggestions since they were so obviously fatigued and traumatized from fighting the undead corpses of their former people. But Jaina would then interject by saying that she stood by Arthas 100% and was present when Medivh told Arthas to lead his people to the west. The words of Antonidas' pupil stirred some struggle within the Archmage's thoughts, but as he was about to speak, Uther would then cut in by saying that he was at Arthas' side ever since he was a child. Many times he had known Arthas to be brash, hard-headed, and perhaps reckless. But today, he saw something in Arthas that he was truly proud of. He saw Arthas making the decisions that only one destined to one day rule the land with the weight of the crown could make. He saw Arthas struggle through decisions the same way Taranis had when he was young. And better yet, he saw the light enveloping Arthas and Light's vengeance in a manner that not even he had been truly blessed with. At that moment, Uther would kneel before his prince and proclaim to the full courtroom that Arthas' words were his own and that he would support his prince's decisions to the end. At that, Arthas would smile gratefully at his friend, and Taranis would nod in agreement, stating to Uther, Jaina, Falric, and Arthas to round up the townsfolk and whatever forces they would need and establish a capital on the western lands. Taranis, however, would continue by saying that he and Antonidas would stay in the eastern kingdoms with a battalion of soldiers, and together, their soldiers and the Kirin Magi will do their best in trying to keep the Scourge at bay. Uther would then inform the courtroom that he would begin mobilizing their troops, but Arthas would cut him off by saying that Falric could do that instead. The young prince reminded Uther of the 25,000 people in Stratholme that were now all raised into undeath, since the city had not been cold, and that they would need Uther and the paladins of the Silver Hand and the incredible power of the light they possessed in order to have a chance of eradicating the Scourge from their lands and hopefully slaying Mal'Ganis. With that, Uther would place his hand on Arthas' shoulder. Both would exchange their blessings and their farewells, and Arthas and Jaina would leave their mentors and family to sail across the seas, leading their people to salvation. At the same time, in the frozen north, Ner'zhul would now seek out a new champion to fulfill the role of becoming the Lich King. That is it to this video, guys. Few things that I do want to clarify and straighten out before this video ends though. The reason why I believe that Jaina would not be able to find a cure even with the help of Antonidas is because in the quest revolving around Crusader Brindenbrad in Northrend, he is afflicted with the plague of undeath, and even with the help of Remulos, Alexstrasza, and Adal, they could not save his life, but they were successful in purifying the corruption so that he would not be raised into undeath. And that is with the help of a son of Cenarius, a dragon aspect, and a Naru. I doubt the Magi at Dalaran would have fared a better chance. Second of all, the light enveloping Arthas. In the novel Arthas Rise of the Lich King, as Arthas makes his way leading his people in battling the dead, culling Stratholme, and hunting Mal'Ganis in the Frozen North, one thing that is extremely notable is how his hammer, Light's Vengeance, begins to fade with the aura of the light that it once had. Whereas in the past it would gleam and emanate with the light, not only enveloping the hammer itself but also Arthas in the protection of the light. When Arthas goes into Stratholme and kills his own people, his hammer would not shine at all. This is why I believe that if he was not blinded by a drive for vengeance or revenge, but instead acted selflessly in carrying out the greater good for his people, then the light would truly embrace and empower him. But that is it to this video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed. It was fun, but pretty time consuming to make, honestly. I do have a sequel in mind for this what if video, and if you have any other what ifs that you want me to work on in the meantime, feel free to leave it down below. And as always, guys, peace out, take care, and have a good one.